The triplets huddled under the rain near the market, and the man knelt down to hand them bread. One of them spoke his mother's name with such precision that it sent shivers down his spine. The rain fell mercilessly over the city, turning the streets into grey, turbulent rivers. The sky, a solid mass of dark clouds, seemed to graze the tops of buildings, stifling any hope for a brighter day. In the heart of this somber scene, the local marketplace pulsed with frantic energy, a vivid contrast to the gloom surrounding it. Jean walked with heavy steps, his 45 years seeming to double in that damp afternoon. His face, etched with deep lines of worry and loneliness, was partially hidden beneath the hood of his soaked jacket. His faded blue eyes wandered unfocused among the colorful stalls and the hurried faces of passers-by. Each step echoed an untold story, a mystery clinging to him like a second skin. The aroma of fresh bread drew him to a small bakery. The welcoming warmth of the shop provided a brief refuge from the storm outside. Jean bought a loaf of bread, his only companion for yet another lonely night. As he stepped out, the cold embraced him once again, relentless. That was when his eyes caught a subtle movement at the edge of his vision. Beneath a worn-out awning, 3 small figures were huddled, visibly trembling. John blinked, confused. They were 3 girls, identical down to the last strand of golden hair peeking out from their dripping hats. Their clothes, inadequate for such harsh weather, clung to their frail bodies. Something within Jean stirred, an emotion long forgotten. His feet carried him toward the girls before his brain could process the decision. Kneeling on the wet sidewalk, he extended the still warm loaf toward the children. His eyes met theirs, 3 pairs of large, frightened green eyes, staring at him with a mix of fear and hope. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The rain, the noise of the market, everything disappeared. Jean felt as if he were on the brink of something important, something that would change his life forever. Then it happened. The girl in the middle, her voice so soft it almost drowned in the noise of the rain, whispered a single word, "Marie." The name struck Jean like lightning. His entire body shuddered, a jolt of shock running through every nerve. Marie, his late mother's name, a name he had not heard in years, a name carrying the weight of 1,000 unresolved memories. Before Jean could respond, before he could recover from the shock, the girls moved. With the agility of startled cats, they stood up and vanished into the busy marketplace crowd. Jean tried to follow them with his eyes, but it was like trying to track raindrops in a rushing river. In seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the sea of umbrellas and hurried coats. Jean remained kneeling on the wet sidewalk, the bread forgotten in his hand. The rain kept falling, but he barely felt it. His world had been turned upside down in mere seconds. Who were those girls? How did they know his mother's name? And why, for the first time in years, did he feel an overwhelming urgency to find answers? Slowly, Jean stood up. His eyes scanned the crowd one last time in a futile search. The girls had vanished, but they left behind more than just their wet footprints on the sidewalk. They left questions, mysteries, and above all, a spark of something Jean thought he had lost long ago: purpose. With determined steps, Jean began walking. The rain continued to fall, but now it seemed to wash away more than the streets. It cleansed years of apathy and isolation. As he walked away from the market, Jean knew his life had changed irrevocably. The puzzle of the 3 identical girls and the ghost of his mother's name pushed him toward an uncertain future, but for the first time in years, it was a future he longed to explore. The city continued its frantic pace around him, unaware of the quiet transformation that had just taken place. To the world, it was just another rainy day. To Jean, it was the beginning of a journey that promised to unearth long-buried secrets and perhaps offer a chance at redemption. The creak of the door echoed through the empty apartment, announcing Jean's return. The silence that greeted him felt almost tangible, an old companion now threatening to suffocate him. Raindrops dripped from his jacket, forming a small puddle on the worn wooden floor. Jean stood still for a moment, his mind still at the market, replaying the surreal encounter with the triplets. His heavy steps led him to the kitchen, where he placed the forgotten bread on the counter. The aroma, once inviting, now felt out of place, as though it belonged to another life. Jean found himself staring at his reflection in the fogged-up window, the city lights flickering beyond the wet glass. The man staring back seemed a stranger, his eyes haunted by questions without answers. A flash of lightning lit the sky, bringing with it a surge of memories. Suddenly, Jean was no longer in his apartment, but in a small childhood home. The sound of rain transformed into shattering dishes, muffled shouting, and the soft sob of a child. Marie, his mother, was on her knees on the kitchen floor, gathering pieces of porcelain with trembling hands. Her face, usually so gentle, was marked by tears and an expression of despair that even young Jean recognized all too well. "It's all right, my love," she whispered, more to herself than to the frightened boy in the corner. "Mommy's just having a tough day." The memory dissolved as quickly as it came, leaving Jean gasping, leaning on the kitchen sink. His mother, Marie, a woman of contradictions. Loving and dedicated one moment, tormented and distant the next. A constant dance between light and shadow that defined Jean's childhood. Driven by a force he could not name, Jean headed to the small closet in the hallway. In the back, behind boxes of tools and never-used Christmas decorations, there was a tattered shoebox. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled it out, as though he were unearthing not only objects, but parts of himself long buried. Jean took the box to the living room, sitting down on the worn couch. For a moment, he merely looked at it, gathering courage. Finally, with a deep breath, he lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and faded perfume hit him first. Yellowed photographs stared back at him, capturing moments frozen in time. Marie smiling at a picnic, her eyes shining with a joy Jean rarely saw at home. Himself, as a child, holding a science fair trophy, the pride evident on his mother's face beside him. Each photo was a window to a complicated past, reminding Jean of the happy times that existed between emotional storms. His fingers traced the outline of his mother's face, an acute pain of longing mixed with renewed confusion. Among the photos, carefully folded letters caught his attention. Marie's elegant handwriting filled pages upon pages, some addressed to Jean, others appearing to be journal entries. He read them avidly, discovering facets of his mother he had never known, her struggles with depression, her unfulfilled dreams, her deep, complicated love for her son. One letter in particular made Jean pause. Dated just a few months before Marie's death, the content was cryptic yet intriguing. "My dearest Jean, there is so much I wish I could tell you, so many secrets I have carried for years. My special project is finally bearing fruit, and I feel I am making the difference I always dreamed of. Perhaps one day you will understand why I kept this hidden. I hope that when that day comes, you can forgive me and see that everything I did was out of love, not just for you, but for all those who needed help. With all my love, Mom." Jean reread the letter several times, his mind spinning. A special project, secrets. The Marie he knew and the woman who wrote that letter seemed like two different people, and yet the words rang with a truth he could not deny. The pieces began to fit in his mind. His mother's mysterious work, her unexplained absences, the hushed phone calls in the middle of the night, and now, those triplets at the market, speaking Marie's name as if it were a talisman. June stood abruptly, knocking over the box, photos and letters scattered across the floor, but he barely noticed. An ironclad resolve took hold of him. The mystery of his mother and those children was connected, he was sure of it now. And he was determined to find out how. Grabbing his still damp jacket, Jean headed to the door. The rain outside had eased to a light drizzle, but the storm in his mind was just beginning. As he closed the door behind him, Jean knew he was embarking on a journey that might change everything he thought he knew about his mother, about himself, and about the legacy Marie had left behind. The elevator descended, carrying Jean into the damp night and an uncertain future. The wet streets reflected the city lights, creating a shimmering path before him. Jean walked on, driven by the need for answers and the hope of finally understanding the echoes of the past that had haunted him for so long. Behind him, in his now truly empty apartment, the open shoebox remained, its memories exposed like clues to a long-forgotten puzzle. And somewhere in the city, 3 identical little girls continued their flight, unaware of the role they would play in Jean's search for truth and redemption. The market, once just another place Jean passed through, became the center of his universe in the days that followed. Every morning, he arrived at sunrise, his eyes scouring every face, every shadow, in search of the 3 small figures that had turned his life upside down. The hours dragged on, long and fruitless. Jean roamed the cramped corridors between stalls, the smell of fresh fruits and newly baked bread mixing with the lingering scent of rain that seemed never to leave the city. Vendors began to recognize him, casting curious looks at the man who wandered aimlessly day after day. On the 4th day of his relentless search, fate decided to intervene. Exhausted and discouraged, Jean leaned against a wall next to a small flower shop. The sweet scent of flowers was a welcome contrast to the market's humid, heavy atmosphere. "You look like you could use a bit of color in your life," a gentle voice surprised him. Jean turned, meeting a pair of warm brown eyes watching him with a blend of curiosity and concern. The woman, middle-aged with a kind smile, offered him a yellow daisy. "I'm Amélie," she introduced herself, "and this little one is free. It looks like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Jean accepted the flower, feeling oddly moved by the simple gesture. "Jean," he replied, his voice hoarse from calling out for children who never appeared. "Thank you, Amélie. That's very kind of you." Something in Amélie's expression, a genuine compassion, prompted Jean's words to flow. Before he knew it, he was telling her about meeting the triplets, about hearing his mother's name whispered, about the search that felt increasingly impossible. Amélie listened attentively, her face lighting up with recognition. "The triplets. I've seen them around here a few times," she exclaimed, making Jean's heart leap. "Always alone, poor things. They looked so scared, like little lost birds." Jean leaned forward, eager for more information. "When? Exactly where? Did they speak to you?" Amélie shook her head, her face tensing with concern. "They never spoke, no. But I saw them rummaging through the trash bins behind the fruit stands. I tried to approach once, offering something to eat, but they ran as if their lives depended on it." Jean's mind spun with this new information. The girls were surviving on the streets, alone and frightened. His urgency to find them grew even stronger. "Why are you looking for them, Jean?" Amélie asked softly, her hand lightly touching his arm. "What's your connection to these children?" Jean hesitated, gazing at the daisy in his hand. Something about Amélie's calm presence made him want to open up, to share the burden he carried. "My mother," he began, his voice low. "They knew her name. And there's something else, a mystery I need to solve. I feel that finding them is the key to understanding everything." Amélie nodded, sympathetic. "Sometimes the universe places puzzles in our path to guide us to greater truths," she said, a wise gleam in her eyes. "I hope you find the answers you're seeking, Jean." At that moment, a customer entered the flower shop, interrupting their conversation. Jean pulled away, thanking Amélie again, feeling curiously comforted by their brief interaction. As he watched Amélie attend to the newcomer, something about the customer's posture caught Jean's attention. He was a middle-aged man, dressed discreetly, but his eyes were alert, scanning the surroundings with an intensity that seemed out of place in a simple flower shop. Jean approached discreetly, pretending to examine a nearby arrangement. The man's hushed words drifted toward him. 3 identical little girls, blonde hair, green eyes. "Have you seen anything like that around here?" Jean's body tensed, his senses on high alert. Amélie said something he could not hear, but her tone sounded cautious. The man thanked her and turned to leave, his eyes meeting Jean's for a brief moment. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by a calculated expression of indifference. As he passed by Jean, the man dropped, apparently by accident, a small card. Jean bent down to pick it up, but by the time he stood, the stranger had already disappeared into the bustling market crowd. Staring at the card in his hand, Jean felt a chill run down his spine. It bore only a single handwritten sentence: "Not all the answers lie in the past. Follow the flowers." Confused and intrigued, Jean turned back to Amélie, who was watching him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Who was that man?" Jean asked, showing her the card. Amélie shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know, but it's not the first time he's come asking about lost children." "Jean," she hesitated, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "be careful. There's more to this story than meets the eye. Those girls, they might be in real danger." Amélie's words weighed on Jean like lead. The quest that had started as a personal journey of discovery now took on darker, more urgent dimensions. The triplets were not only the key to his past's mystery, they were also vulnerable children, possibly hunted by forces he did not yet understand. Slipping the cryptic card into his pocket, Jean bid Amélie goodbye, promising to return the next day. As he left the market, still holding the yellow daisy, he felt a renewed determination. It was no longer just about uncovering his mother's secrets. It was also about protecting 3 defenseless kids from an unknown threat. Night fell over the city, lights beginning to flicker in building windows. Jean glanced at the darkening sky, sensing the weight of responsibility now resting on his shoulders. Somewhere in that vast metropolis, 3 identical little girls fought to survive, carrying secrets that might change everything. With every step toward his apartment, Jean made a silent promise. He would find them, he would protect them, and in the process, he might finally discover the answers he had been seeking for so long. Not just about his mother, but about himself and the purpose that had eluded him for years. The search had only begun, and Jean knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and revelations, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, driven by a mission greater than himself. With Amélie's daisy as a talisman of hope, Jean plunged into the night, ready to face the mysteries awaiting him. Early the next morning, Jean found himself in front of a run-down building, the cryptic card clutched in his sweaty hand. "Guiding Star Community Center," announced a faded sign above the entrance. The words on the card echoed in his mind. "Follow the flowers." It was a guess, but the daisies planted haphazardly along the cracked sidewalk seemed to confirm he was in the right place. Jean hesitated a moment, his hand hovering over the rusty doorknob. What would he find inside? What secrets had his mother buried in this forgotten place? With a deep breath, he turned the knob and stepped in. The interior of the center was a study in neglect. Furniture draped in dust, yellowed papers scattered on the floor, the air heavy with the scent of mold and forgotten memories. Jean advanced cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. A row of rusted file cabinets caught his attention. Carefully, he opened the first drawer, coughing as a cloud of dust rose. His eyes widened at the contents, folders upon folders, all labeled with women's names and dates. "Single Mothers Support Program," read the header of one document, and there, among the list of coordinators, was the name that made Jean's heart leap: Marie Dubois. Jean's hands shook as he flipped through the files, taking in information that painted a picture of his mother he had never known. Marie was not just a volunteer, she was the driving force behind a program that offered shelter, counseling, and support to women in desperate situations. Among the papers, a photograph slipped to the floor. Jean picked it up, his breath catching. There was his mother, younger than he remembered, surrounded by a group of women and children. Her smile was radiant, filled with a sense of purpose and joy he rarely saw at home. And there, at the center, 3 identical infants in the arms of a young woman who looked exhausted, yet happy. "Sarah," John murmured, recognizing the name written on the back of the photo. He turned his attention back to the files, searching frantically for more information on this woman and her triplets. Finally, he found a folder with her name. The pages told a story of struggle and hope. Sarah, a 19-year-old who had arrived at the center with nothing but the clothes on her back and an uncertain future. Marie had taken her under her wing, guiding her through a difficult pregnancy and the surprising birth of identical triplets. Jean read ravenously, absorbing every detail. His mother's notes were a mix of professional reports and deeply emotional personal observations. It was clear Marie had become deeply attached to Sarah and her daughters. One passage in particular made Jean pause, his heart racing. Sarah is afraid for the girl's future. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would look after the children. It's a daunting commitment, but how can I refuse? These little ones have become a part of me, just like... The sentence ended abruptly, as if Marie had been interrupted or had hesitated to finish her thought. Jean frowned, feeling he stood on the edge of a crucial revelation. Suddenly, a sound made him whirl around. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a shadow move down the hallway. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing against the empty walls. No answer came, but the sensation of being watched did not leave him. Nerves on edge, Jean quickly gathered the most important documents, including the photo and Sarah's file. He needed to leave and process everything he had discovered. On his way out, his eyes caught one last detail, a dusty calendar on the wall, stuck on March of 20 years ago. A date was circled in red, marked with a single word, promise. Jean stepped out into daylight, blinking as though emerging from a dream. The revelations swirled in his mind. His mother, an unsung hero to so many women, Sarah and her triplets, linked to him by a promise made 2 decades ago. The mystery that seemed to deepen with each new discovery. As he walked down the street, Jean couldn't help glancing over his shoulder. The sense of being watched persisted, feeding a growing anxiety. Who else was interested in this story? And why? The puzzle pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was more complex and unsettling than Jean ever imagined. His mother had taken many secrets to her grave, but now, one by one, they were resurfacing. Jean clutched the documents to his chest, determined to unravel the rest of the mystery. He owed it to his mother, to Sarah, and to those 3 frightened girls he had met at the market. Something told him time was running out, that there was more at stake than simply solving a riddle from the past. Blending into the crowd on the busy streets, Jean made a silent promise. He would find the truth, no matter the cost. And somehow, he would find those triplets and keep the promise his mother had made so many years before. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the streets. Jean quickened his pace, feeling the weight of the secrets he now carried. Somewhere in the city, 3 identical girls struggled to survive, unaware they were the center of a story that began long before their birth. Night fell over the city, bringing with it the promise of more mysteries and dangers. Jean knew each step he took led him deeper into a labyrinth of family secrets and forgotten vows. But he would not turn back. Not now, when he was finally starting to understand his mother's true legacy and his own role in this still unfolding story. With one last glance behind him, Jean disappeared into the crowd, carrying with him the keys to a long-buried past and an uncertain future. His quest for the truth and for the mysterious triplets had only just begun, and Jean was determined to see it through, no matter where it led. Jean's apartment, once a refuge of solitude, now seemed to hum with newly uncovered secrets. Spread across the kitchen table, the documents from the community center told a story Jean could scarcely believe. With trembling fingers, he pored over the yellowed pages. His mother's program, Guiding Stars, was more than a simple support group. It was a haven, a beacon of hope for women society had cast aside. Marie not only offered advice and resources, she became deeply involved in these women's lives, serving as an anchor in their personal storms. One report in particular captured his attention. Written by Marie herself, it detailed Sarah's case. Sarah came to us shattered, not just by abandonment, but by years of abuse. The news of her pregnancy with triplets nearly broke her, but there's a strength in her that inspires me. Together, we're building a future for her and her daughters. These little girls, not yet born, are already a miracle. They remind me that hope can exist even in the darkest circumstances. Jean felt a lump form in his throat. His mother's compassion and devotion leapt off the pages, painting a portrait of a woman he hardly recognized. How could he have been so blind to this crucial part of her life? Photographs accompanied the reports, showing Sarah's journey. In one, Marie held Sarah's hand during an ultrasound, both of them with tears in their eyes. In another, taken in the hospital, Marie cradled one of the newborns, her face radiant with joy. The last photo made Jean pause, his heart racing. In it, Marie sat on a couch, the three girls, now about 2 years old, snuggled around her while she read them a story. The love in her eyes was palpable, reminding Jean of how she had looked at him when he was a child. Suddenly, a long-buried memory surfaced, so vivid that Jean could almost smell the late-night coffee his mother always drank. He was 40, visiting Marie in a rare moment of connection. It was late, and he was about to say goodbye when the phone rang. Marie answered, her face turning pale instantly. "Sarah, what happened? Calm down, dear." Marie's voice trembled. "No, don't do anything rash. I'm coming right now." When she hung up, Marie was in tears. Confused and worried, Jean asked what was happening. But his mother only shook her head, murmuring something about an old friend in trouble. She rushed out, leaving Jean with more questions than answers. Now, sitting in his apartment years later, the pieces began to fit. That night had not been an isolated incident, but part of a lifelong commitment Marie had kept secret. A heavy wave of guilt and regret fell upon Jean. How many times had he ignored the signs, too busy with his own life to notice the world his mother had built around him? The nights she came home exhausted, the hushed phone calls, the sudden trips, all of it made sense now. "Mom," Jean whispered into the empty apartment, "why didn't you ever tell me?" But he knew the answer. Marie had always protected him, perhaps overly so, and he, in his selfish youth, had never asked, never tried to see beyond the surface. A sudden knock at the door pulled Jean from his reflections. Cautious after recent events, he approached slowly. Through the peephole, he saw a middle-aged man in formal attire, holding a briefcase. "Mr. Dubois," the man called calmly yet urgently. "My name is Francois Lemaire. I'm an attorney and I knew Sarah. We need to talk." Jean's heart skipped a beat. Sarah, the name tying the entire mystery together. With hesitation, he opened the door. Francois stepped inside, his eyes swiftly taking in the apartment and the documents scattered over the table. His gaze lingered on the photo of Marie with the triplets. "I see you've already started digging into the past," Francois noted, a touch of sadness in his voice. "Mr. Dubois, there's much you need to know about your mother, about Sarah, and about the girls you encountered at the market." Jean felt his world spin around him. Here was someone who could finally fill in the blanks, someone who knew the whole story. How did you find me?" Jean asked, his voice rasping. Francois smiled sadly. "Marie left very clear instructions. If anything happened to Sarah, I was to find you. It seems fate decided the time was now." Jean gestured toward the worn couch, inviting Francois to sit. As the attorney settled in, Jean felt he was on the verge of revelations that would change his life forever. "Mr. Dubois," Francois began, his voice grave, "what I'm about to tell you is a story of love, sacrifice, and promises spanning generations. Your mother and Sarah, they forged bonds that go beyond blood, and now it's up to you to honor those bonds and protect the legacy they left." Jean leaned forward, his heart pounding. The answers he sought were here, about to be unveiled. Yet something told him that, with those answers, a far greater responsibility would emerge. As Francois opened his briefcase, preparing to reveal secrets long kept hidden, Jean felt the weight of his past and future converging in that moment. The invisible threads his mother had woven over the years now enmeshed him, calling him to a mission he barely understood. Night was falling outside, but in Jean's apartment, a light was about to shine on truths that had been obscured for too long. The journey that began with a chance encounter at the market was about to lead him into depths he never imagined existed in his seemingly ordinary life. The silence that followed Francois's first words hung heavily in the small apartment. Jean felt as though the floor had vanished beneath his feet, leaving him suspended over an abyss of revelations. "Sarah passed away 3 weeks ago," Francois said, his voice calm but laden with sorrow. "It was sudden, a car accident. At least we're told she didn't suffer." Jean closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the impact of this news. A woman he'd never met yet, who was intricately linked to his life, gone. "What about the girls?" he asked, dreading the answer. Francois sighed. "They disappeared right after the funeral. At first, we thought some relative had taken them, but—" He paused, running a hand over his tired face. "We now know they ran away. They're out there on their own, Jean. 3 5-year-olds, scared and vulnerable." The image of the 3 girls huddled in the rain at the market flashed back in Jean's mind with painful clarity. His heart clenched at the thought of their fear and confusion. "The authorities are searching," Francois continued. "But there are complications. Sarah had enemies, people from her past she feared. We have reason to believe the girls could be in real danger." Jean stood abruptly, unable to contain his agitation. "I saw them," he said, voice trembling. "At the market a few days ago. They were alone, wet, cold. I tried to help, but they ran." Francois straightened, his eyes widening. "You saw them? You're sure?" Jean nodded, describing the brief encounter, how one of the girls had whispered his mother's name. With each word, Francois's face paled. "This changes everything," the attorney murmured, more to himself than to Jean. "They're still nearby, then? Still in the city? But why would they return to the market? It's far too risky." "What's going on, Francois?" Jean demanded, his patience waning. "Why so much secrecy? Why didn't my mother ever tell me about Sarah or the girls?" Francois looked at Jean with a mix of compassion and resignation. "Your mother, Jean, Marie was an extraordinary woman. She saved, and when the triplets were born, well, Marie loved them as if they were her own grandchildren." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Sarah had a complicated past. Abuse, domestic violence. She fled a dangerous situation when she discovered she was pregnant. Marie not only helped her hide, but gave her and the girls a new chance at life." John felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. His mother, a silent heroine he'd never truly known. "There was a promise," Francois went on in a low voice. "Sarah made Marie swear that if anything happened to her, Marie would look after the girls, keep them safe and together." The weight of this revelation fell upon Jean like an avalanche. Suddenly, his mother's sometimes distant behavior, the nights she came home late and exhausted, all of it made terrible sense. "But my mother, she died before Sarah," Jean said, voice quivering. Francois nodded sadly. "Yes, and that complicated everything. Marie left instructions with me, a contingency plan. If anything happened to Sarah, I was to find you, tell you everything. Marie believed you would honor her promise, that you would care for the girls as she would have." Jean felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, his mother's faith in him, the responsibility for 3 innocent lives, the danger surrounding them. All of it hit him at once. "Why did she never tell me?" Jean asked, voice barely a whisper. "Why carry that burden alone?" "She wanted to protect you, Jean," Francois replied gently. "And perhaps also Sarah and the girls. The fewer people knew, the safer they all were. Marie, she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, always putting others first." Jean walked to the window, gazing out at the city night without really seeing it. His mind was a whirlwind of reinterpretations and terrifying possibilities. "What happens now?" he finally asked, turning to Francois. The attorney stood, his face serious. "Now, Jean, we need to find those girls before it's too late. They are Sarah's legacy, your mother's last wish, and more importantly, they are 3 innocent children who desperately need help." Jean felt a fierce determination rising within him, replacing the confusion and shock. "I will find them," he said, voice firm. "No matter what it costs, I'll honor my mother's promise." Francois offered a small smile, a flash of hope in his weary eyes. "Marie was right about you, Jean. She always said that when the time came, you would do the right thing." As Francois prepared to leave, giving Jean every detail and contact he might need, a new reality solidified around them. The search, which had begun as personal curiosity, now turned into a matter of life and death. Jean walked Francois to the door, his mind already racing with plans and strategies. Before leaving, the attorney turned one last time. "Jean," he said, voice grave, "there is more at stake here than you can imagine. These girls, they are special. And there are people who would do anything to get their hands on them. Be cautious. And remember, not everyone who offers help is trustworthy." With those enigmatic words, Francois departed, leaving Jean alone with the weight of revelations and the urgency of a mission that could not fail. Jean closed the door and leaned against it, shutting his eyes for a moment. The apartment, once a haven of loneliness, now seemed to pulse with the untold stories of his mother, the intertwined lives of Sarah and her daughters, and the uncertain fate that lay ahead. Opening his eyes, John walked resolutely to the table, spreading out the documents and photos. His gaze fell on the image of his mother with the triplets, their faces shining with happiness. "I promise, Mom," John whispered to the photo, "I'll find them. I'll protect them, no matter what happens." Night wore on, but for Jean, a new journey was only beginning, a journey of redemption, discovery, and above all, fulfilling a promise that transcended generations. The city's streets held its secrets, and somewhere out there, 3 little girls awaited a savior they never knew they had. With one last look at his mother's photo, Jean began to plan. Time was of the essence, and he could not fail. Marie's legacy, the triplets' future, and his own chance at redemption hinged on his success, and Jean was determined not to disappoint any of them. Dawn had barely broken when Jean arrived at Amélie's flower shop. The marketplace was just waking up, vendors setting up their stalls under a grey sky threatening more rain. Amélie was already there, arranging a bouquet of daisies, her face lighting up when she saw Jean. "You look different," she observed, noting the determination in his eyes. Jean nodded, inhaling deeply. "Amélie, I need your help. It's about the triplets." In the following minutes, Jean shared all he had learned from the community center documents to Francois's visit. Amélie listened carefully, her eyes widening with each revelation. "My God, Jean," she whispered when he finished. "Those poor children, and of course I'll help. What can we do?" Relief washed over Jean. Having Amélie at his side made the burden feel a little lighter. "We need to find them before it's too late. You know the market and these streets better than I do. Maybe someone has seen something." Amélie nodded firmly. "Leave it to me. I know every vendor and homeless person in this neighborhood. If the girls have been around, someone must have noticed." The two split up, Jean combing nearby streets while Amélie discreetly questioned people in the market. Hours passed slowly, each minute heightening Jean's anxiety. What if they were too late? It was mid-afternoon when the first lead surfaced. A fruit vendor told Amélie about 3 identical little girls who had appeared the night before, picking up fallen fruit by his stall. "Poor things," the man said, shaking his head. "They looked hungry. I left some apples where they could reach them easily." Encouraged by the news, Jean and Amélie intensified their search. More reports began to surface. A baker who left unsold bread in a particular alley, an elderly woman who had seen the girls sleeping in an abandoned playground. "They're surviving thanks to the kindness of strangers," Amélie noted, her voice a mix of admiration and concern. Jean nodded, feeling both relief and urgency. The girls were alive, but how long could they survive on the streets? Following the leads, they found themselves venturing into a poorer part of the city. Dilapidated buildings rose around them, clothes hanging from makeshift lines between windows. Barefoot children played on cracked sidewalks, eyeing the newcomers curiously. It was there, on the corner of a narrow street, that they met Claire, a middle-aged woman, her hair streaked with grey and her kind eyes weary, was handing out hot soup to a group of homeless individuals when Jean and Amélie approached. "Excuse me," Jean began. "We're looking for 3 little girls." Before he could finish, Claire's eyes widened in recognition. "You're Marie's son, aren't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My goodness, you have her eyes." Jean was momentarily speechless, taken aback. You knew my mother?" Claire nodded, a sad smile on her lips. "We worked together at the support program for years. Marie was, well, she was special. Come, let's talk someplace more private." She led them to a small ground-floor apartment nearby. The space was cramped but cozy, filled with photos and mementos. Claire gestured for them to sit on a worn-out couch. "So, you finally learned about Sarah and the girls," Claire stated, not as a question but a realization. Jean nodded, leaning forward. "Claire, please, we need to find them." "They're in danger." Claire took a deep breath, her eyes drifting to distant memories. "Marie and we saw many women come through our program over the years, but Sarah was different. She arrived so broken, so scared. Marie took her under her wing immediately." Amélie placed a comforting hand on Jean's arm, sensing his tension. "When the triplets were born," Claire continued, "it was as though a light switched on in Sarah. But the fear never fully left her. She lived with constant dread that someone from her past would find them, or that the authorities would take the girls away." "What past?" Jean asked, voice tight. Claire shook her head sadly. "Sarah never went into details, but we knew she had escaped an abusive situation. There was a man, someone powerful and dangerous. Sarah said he would do anything to have the girls under his control." Jean felt a chill course through him. Francois's words echoed in his mind. "There is more at stake here than you can imagine." "Marie promised to protect them," Claire said gently. "She loved those girls like her own granddaughters. She spent sleepless nights planning, preparing for every possible scenario. And now," Jean murmured, "it falls to me to keep that promise." Claire looked him in the eye, a sudden intensity there. "Jean, you need to understand. These girls, there's something special about them. Something beyond the ordinary. That's why they're in so much danger." Jean and Amélie exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean?" Amélie asked. Claire hesitated, as though weighing her next words carefully. "There were incidents, things we couldn't explain. The girls seemed to know things they shouldn't, to see things that weren't there. Sarah believed that was why their father wanted them so badly." A heavy silence filled the tiny apartment. Jean felt as if he stood on the brink of a deep abyss, about to plunge into waters far more turbulent than he had imagined. "Claire," he finally said, voice steady despite the storm in his mind, "do you have any idea where they might be now?" The older woman hesitated before answering. "There's a place, an old abandoned playground where Sarah used to take the girls. It was their safe spot. If they're scared and alone, they might have gone there." Jean stood up, a determined light in his eyes. "Can you show us where it is?" Claire nodded, grabbing her coat. As the 3 headed out of the apartment, the rain began again, a thin, persistent drizzle. "Jean," Claire said softly as they walked, "when you find them, be prepared. They may not be what you expect." With those enigmatic words echoing in his ears, Jean, Amélie, and Claire ventured further into the labyrinth of narrow streets and buried secrets. Somewhere ahead, 3 little girls awaited them, carrying a mystery that threatened to change everything Jean thought he knew about family, destiny, and the very fabric of reality. The rain fell gently as Jean, Amélie, and Claire walked through the narrow streets of the neighborhood. Their footsteps echoed with the soft drumming of raindrops against tin roofs and rusty gutters. Jean felt the weight of every step, each choice that had led him to this moment. His mind wandered, diving into memories long buried. Marie, young and radiant, holding baby Jean in her arms. Her smile was wide, but her eyes betrayed a profound exhaustion. Alone, she faced the world with fierce determination. It's just you and me against the world, my little one, she would whisper, kissing her son's forehead. The years passed in a flurry of images, Marie rushing from one job to another, trying to make ends meet, nights when she came home exhausted, yet still found the energy to read Jean a bedtime story, moments of laughter and love interspersed with silent struggles. Jean recalled himself at 12, watching his mother through a crack in the door. Marie was on the phone, her voice a hushed urgency. "Sarah, take a deep breath. You're safe now, I promise. I'll help you and the baby." "Wait, babies? My God, triplets." The young Jean frowned, confused, but soon forgot the mysterious conversation, absorbed by his own adolescent problems. His memories sped forward. Marie, now with silver strands in her hair, sitting at the kitchen table late at night, surrounded by stacks of papers, adoption forms, medical reports, legal documents, her face lined with worry but lit with a spark of purpose. Jean, now a young adult, brushed past her without noticing, too caught up in his own life to see the silent battles his mother fought. "Jean," Marie would call softly, "do you have a minute?" "Sorry, Mom, I'm late to meet my friends," he would reply, already halfway out the door. The weight of these memories, of the indifference he had shown, crashed over Jean like an avalanche. He stopped abruptly, causing Amélie and Claire to look at him with concern. "Jean?" Amélie gently touched his arm. "Are you okay?" He shook his head, fighting tears threatening to fall. "I was so blind, Amélie, so selfish. My mother, she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders and I never even noticed." Amélie embraced him, her touch comforting against the cold rain. "You didn't know, Jean. Don't blame yourself." Claire watched with compassionate eyes. "Marie always wanted to protect you, Jean. She didn't want you to bear her burdens." Jean straightened, wiping his eyes. "But now it's my turn to carry her legacy, to make the difference she always wanted to make." Amélie offered a gentle smile, her gaze reflecting a deep understanding. "You know, Jean, we all have regrets, times we wish we could have chosen differently. But what matters is what we do from now on." She paused, as if deciding whether to continue. "I too had my moment of redemption. Years ago, I lost my younger sister to drugs. I was so busy with my career that I missed the signs, ignored her silent cries for help. By the time I realized, it was too late." Jean looked at her, surprised by the revelation. Amélie went on, her voice gentle but steady. "That's why I opened the flower shop, you know, to create a space of beauty and peace, to be present for those around me. Every flower I sell, every smile I spark, is a way to honor her memory, to make the difference I couldn't before." Amélie's words resonated deeply with Jean. He realized he was not alone in his journey of redemption, that everyone carried their own burdens, seeking ways to balance them. Claire, who had stepped away to take a call, returned with urgency in her step. "Jean, Amélie, we have to go now. I got an anonymous tip." The girls were seen near the old playground on Willow Street. Jean's heart leaped. They were so close. "Let's go," he said, new determination in his voice. As they raced through the rain-soaked streets, Jean felt the weight of all the choices that had led him here. His own, his mother's, Sarah's. Every decision, every moment of blindness or clarity, had woven the complex tapestry guiding them toward three little lives on the brink. The playground came into view, a ghostly sight in the misty rain. Rusted swings creaked softly in the wind, and a faded slide stood like a monument to happier times. Jean, Amélie, and Claire stopped at the entrance, their hearts beating in unison. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the gentle patter of rain. "They're here," Claire whispered, her eyes scanning the playground. "I can feel it." Jean took a step forward, his voice trembling but determined. "Girls, are you there? We came to help." I'm Marie's son." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a subtle movement behind the old carousel caught his eye. 3 pairs of green eyes, identical and fearful, watched them from the darkness. Jean felt the weight of generations of promises and secrets converge at that moment. As he slowly approached the triplets, He knew he was stepping across a line of no return. His mother's legacy, these children's future, and his own path to redemption all hung on this precarious instant. The rain kept falling softly, washing away the past and preparing the ground for an uncertain future filled with possibilities. Jean extended his hand, a gesture of peace and protection, ready to embrace the destiny his mother had unknowingly prepared him for. The air in the abandoned park felt charged with electricity, a palpable mix of hope and fear in the gentle rain. Jean took another hesitant step toward the old carousel, where 3 pairs of green eyes regarded them with both curiosity and dread. "It's all right," Jean said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We won't hurt you. We came to help." A sudden movement made Jean freeze. 2 of the girls, like frightened animals, emerged from behind the carousel poised to run. Their blonde hair was tangled and dirty, their clothes worn and soaked. Jean's heart tightened at the sight of them. "Wait," Amélie cried out, her voice gentle yet urgent. "Please, don't run. Are you hungry? We have food." The girls hesitated, their small bodies trembling, not only from the cold, but from exhaustion and fear. Jean used the moment to slowly pull from his pocket the photo he had found among his mother's belongings. "Look," he said, holding out the picture. "Do you recognize this lady?" The girls' eyes widened as they saw the photo. It showed Marie smiling as she held 3 infants, these very triplets, years before. "Grandma Marie," one of the girls whispered, so low that Jean barely caught it. "Yes," Jean confirmed, feeling a surge of emotion on hearing his mother called Grandma. "She was my mother. I'm Jean. And you must be Emma and Sophie, right?" The girls exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. Finally, the slightly taller one took a small step forward. "I'm Emma," she said, her voice shaky but brave. "This is Sophie. How do you know us?" Jean knelt down, staying at the girl's eye level. "My mother, Marie, told me about you. She loved you 3 very much." "3," Sophie murmured, tears forming in her wide eyes. "Chloe, she's sick. We hid her." Jean's heart lurched. "Where is Chloe? We can help her." Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, you'll separate us. That's why we ran away. Mom said if something happened to her, bad men would come for us." Amélie stepped closer slowly, compassion etched on her face. "No one's going to separate you, sweethearts. I promise. We're here to keep you together and safe." The girls seemed to consider this, their small faces etched with doubt and hope. "Why did you run away?" Jean asked gently, though he already suspected the answer. Sophie sniffled, tears now rolling freely down her dirty cheeks. Mom is gone. There was an accident. Then strangers came, talking about foster homes and separation. We couldn't stand being apart." Emma hugged her sister, her own eyes brimming with tears she struggled to hold back. "Mom always said we had to stick together no matter what, that we were special and bad people might want to hurt us." Jean felt a knot tightening in his chest. The children's fear was palpable, stemming from a lifetime of secrets and vague threats they barely understood. "You are very brave," Amélie said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've taken care of each other all this time, but now let us help, especially Chloe. If she's sick, she needs a doctor." The girls shared another silent look. Finally, Emma gave a slight nod. "She's in the basement of the old library," Emma revealed. "We promised we'd go back with food and medicine, but..." At that moment, distant thunder rumbled across the sky, making the girls shrink in fear. The rain began to pour harder, and the wind picked up, howling through the park's rusty play equipment. "A storm's coming," Claire warned, looking anxiously at the darkening sky. "We need to get these children out of here and find Chloe fast." Jean reached out to Emma and Sophie. "Do you trust us enough to take us to your sister? I promise, in my mother's memory, I will keep you 3 together and safe." The girls hesitated for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, Emma placed her small hand in Jean's. Sophie reached for Amélie's hand. "We have to hurry," Emma said, her voice suddenly stronger and more determined than Jean would expect from a 5-year-old. Chloe, she sees things, bad things. The storm scares her more than it does us. Jean and Amélie exchanged curious glances. Claire's words echoed in Jean's mind. Be prepared. They may not be what you expect. Leaving the park quickly, the group braved the intensifying storm. Jean felt the weight of the responsibility he had taken on, but also a fierce determination. These children were now his family, his mother's legacy, and he would do anything to protect them. The old library loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Somewhere within its depths, a frightened, ill little girl waited for help. Jean squeezed the girl's hands gently, feeling for the first time in his life that he was exactly where he needed to be. The rain now fell in sheets, washing over the streets and sweeping away the last remnants of the past. Before them lay an uncertain future, full of possibilities. Jean knew that whatever they found in the library, their lives would never be the same. The rain pounded in dense curtains, turning the streets into churning streams as Jean, Amélie, Claire, and the 2 triplets raced toward the old library. Thunder roared overhead, echoing between abandoned buildings like the growl of an ancient, furious beast. Emma and Sophie, soaked and shivering, led the group with surprising resolve for such small children. Their green eyes shone in the growing darkness, reflecting the sporadic flashes of lightning across the sky. There, Emma shouted, pointing to a looming, dilapidated structure ahead. As they neared the library, memories of the last days with their mother overwhelmed the twins. Sarah, pale and weary, clutching her 3 daughters tightly. Her eyes, ever vigilant, scanned every shadow as though expecting danger to materialize at any moment. Remember, my little ones, she whispered, her voice trembling. You are special, more than you can imagine. If anything happens to me, you must stay together, protect each other, trust only yourselves. Chloe, always the most sensitive, gazed at her mother with wide, fearful eyes. Mommy, I saw it again. The bad man is coming. Sarah paled further, pulling Chloe closer. Shh, my love. He can't find us here. We're safe. But the fear in her eyes contradicted her calming words. The group arrived at the library entrance, pulling Emma and Sophie from their painful recollections. The door was locked, but a broken basement window offered a way in. This way, Sophie said, her voice nearly lost in the roaring wind. Jean crouched, examining the gap. It was tight but passable. I'll go first, he declared. Amélie, help the girls. Claire, can you stand guard? Without waiting for an answer, Jean squeezed through the broken window, dropping into the dark, damp basement. The smell of mold and neglect assaulted him immediately. He switched on his phone's flashlight, sweeping it around the area. Chloe, he called softly. We're here to help. Your sisters are with us. A sudden movement in the darkness made him spin. From behind a pile of musty books, a small figure emerged, accompanied by several larger ones. Who are you? A raspy voice demanded. An elderly man, dressed in layers of tattered clothing, stood protectively in front of Chloe. Before June could respond, Emma and Sophie scrambled inside, followed by Amélie. Chloe? The twins shouted in unison, rushing forward to embrace their sister. The reunion of the triplets was pure emotion. Huddled together, the 3 girls looked like one entity, their tears mixing with the rainwater still dripping from their hair. Jean turned to the group of homeless people who had taken care of Chloe. Thank you, he said sincerely. You saved her life. The old man nodded solemnly. The little one came in with a high fever, rambling about dark men and storms. We couldn't leave her alone. Amélie approached Chloe, gently touching her forehead. She's still burning up, she said, worried. We need to get her to a hospital. Her words were barely out when a deafening crash shook the building. Part of the ceiling collapsed, letting in a torrent of water. The place is caving in, Claire shouted from the window. Get out now! Chaos erupted. The homeless individuals hurried to gather what little they had, while Jean and Amélie tried to organize a safe exit for everyone. The back stairs! One of them yelled. They lead straight to the street. Jean scooped Chloe into his arms, feeling the heat of her fever radiate through her small body. Emma and Sophie clung to Amélie, their eyes wide with terror. As they ran toward the stairs, another crash reverberated, sending beams and chunks of concrete tumbling around them. Jean, seeing a particularly large piece about to strike the group ahead, didn't hesitate. He handed Chloe to Amélie and shoved the others forward, remaining behind. The impact was brutal. Jean felt a sharp pain in his leg as the concrete hit, knocking him down. "Jean!" Amélie shouted, horrified. Through the haze of pain, Jean saw his mother's face, recalling how she always put others first, no matter the cost. "Go," he shouted, "take the girls somewhere safe." But the triplets had other ideas. With surprising strength and determination, they ran back, positioning themselves around Jean. "We won't leave you," Emma declared. "We're a family now," Sophie added. Chloe, still in Amélie's arms, reached out a trembling hand toward Jean. The moment her fingers touched him, Jean felt a surge of warmth and energy course through his body. The pain in his leg receded, and he found he could stand. Dazed and confused but grateful, Jean joined the group. Together, they finally reached the exit, spilling onto the stormy street just as the library collapsed behind them. The rain still beat down relentlessly, but Jean barely noticed it. His gaze was fixed on the three girls who were now part of his life. There was something about them, something beyond the ordinary, which he still didn't fully understand. "We need to get out of here," Claire urged, catching up to them. "There's a safe shelter not too far." Walking through flooded streets, Jean reflected on the night's events. He had risked his life for children he barely knew, and they in turn had saved him in a way he couldn't explain. His mother's legacy, the promise to protect these extraordinary girls, now weighed upon his shoulders. Yet for the first time in a long while, Jean felt truly alive, driven by a clear purpose. The storm raged on around them, but Jean knew they had faced something far more powerful and come out victorious. The real challenge, he suspected, was yet to come. But with Emma, Sophie and Chloe by his side, and with Amélie and Claire as allies, he felt ready to face anything fate might throw at him. As the group headed for the shelter, the rain began to lessen, as though nature itself acknowledged the battle they had fought. A new day was about to dawn, carrying with it the promise of hope and the challenge of safeguarding three extraordinary children in a world not yet ready for them. Amélie's small house, normally a place of peace, was now bustling with activity. The storm still raged outside, but inside, a new kind of tempest, of emotions, revelations, and decisions, was just beginning. Jean carried Chloe into the guest room, her small feverish body shaking in his arms. Amélie followed closely behind, carrying a basin of cold water and towels. "Here," she said softly, gesturing to the bed. "We have to bring this fever down." As Jean gently laid Chloe on the bed, Emma and Sophie crowded around, their wide eyes filled with concern. "Will she be okay?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. Jean knelt to their level, placing a comforting hand on each of their shoulders. "We'll take care of her, I promise." Amélie began applying cool compresses to Chloe's forehead, murmuring quiet words of reassurance. Jean watched, impressed by Amélie's kindness and efficiency. There was something in the way she cared for the girls that tightened his heart in a way he wasn't used to feeling. The hours passed slowly. Chloe's fever fluctuated, sometimes easing, other times spiking alarmingly. Jean and Amélie took turns, one staying by the bed while the other rested or looked after Emma and Sophie. During one of these breaks, in the middle of the night, Jean and Amélie found themselves alone in the small kitchen. Exhaustion was evident in their faces, but there was also a silent bond between them, forged by shared adversity. "You're amazing with them," Jean said quietly, watching Amélie prepare more tea. She offered a tired smile, but her eyes shone. "They're extraordinary children. They remind me of my little sister when she was young." Jean stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Amélie's back. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your sister would be proud of you now." Amélie turned to face him, their eyes meeting. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she leaned forward, her lips brushing his in a soft kiss. The kiss was brief, but filled with promise and shared understanding. When they broke apart, both smiled, a little embarrassed, but sensing something fundamental had changed between them. A cry from the guest room shattered the moment. "Jean! Amélie!" They rushed back to find Chloe sitting up, her eyes wide with fear. Emma and Sophie clung to her hands. "He's coming," Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse. "The man of shadows. He knows we're here." Jean knelt by the bed, taking Chloe's free hand. "No one will hurt you, Chloe. You're safe here." Emma looked at Jean, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "You don't understand. He's not an ordinary man. He's like us. But he uses his gifts for bad things." Sophie nodded, adding, "Mom always said we had to hide from him, that he wanted to use us." Jean exchanged a worried glance with Amélie. Claire's warning echoed in his mind. "There's something special about them." "Girls," Amélie said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed, "can you tell us more about your mom? About what she was afraid of?" The triplets looked at each other, seeming to have a silent conversation. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice stronger now that the fever was easing. "Mom said we were special, that we could do things other people couldn't, but it was a secret because bad people might want to use us." Emma continued, "Sometimes we know things that are going to happen before they happen. Chloe sees things in dreams. I can feel what other people feel." "And I," Sophie said shyly, "sometimes I can move things without touching them. But only when I'm really, really scared or angry." Jean felt his head spin with these revelations. Part of him wanted to dismiss them as fantasy, but he couldn't ignore what he'd seen in the library, how Chloe had healed him with a single touch. "The man of shadows," Jean asked gently. "He's like you." Chloe nodded, trembling. "He's strong, very strong, and he wants us so he can become even stronger." A fierce protectiveness flooded Jean. These children, so young and vulnerable, carried a burden no one should have to bear, least of all 5-year-olds. In that moment, gazing at the triplets' frightened yet courageous faces, Jean made his decision. He would fight for them, protect them at all costs. "Listen," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I don't know exactly what's happening or who this man is. But I promise you, right here, right now, that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and together. You're not alone in this anymore." Amélie placed her hand on Jean's, her eyes shining with determination. "We're all in this together now. A family." Amélie's words warmed Jean's heart. He looked at her and saw not just an ally, but someone with whom he could build a future, a partner in every sense. "Amélie," he began, voice low, "what I'm about to do, it's going to change everything. I'm going to fight for custody. I can't leave them alone, not after all this. But I understand if it's too much for you, if you want out." Amélie silenced him with a gentle kiss. "Jean Dubois, do you really think I'd walk away after all this? I'm with you. With all of you," she added, smiling at the girls. Relief and gratitude flooded Jean. He turned to the triplets, who watched them with a mix of hope and caution. "What do you say, girls?" he asked. "Would you like to stay with us? Be a family?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, Emma reached out and touched Jean's face. Her eyes closed for an instant, and when she opened them, they were brimming with tears. "You really love us," she whispered, sounding both surprised and relieved. Like Mom did. Sophie and Chloe joined the hug, and soon Jean and Amélie found themselves in the center of a tangle of small arms and intermingled tears of sorrow and hope. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside. Dawn approached, bringing the promise of a new day and fresh challenges. Jean knew the road ahead would be difficult. Legal battles, mysterious dangers, and the challenge of raising 3 extraordinary children all lay before them. But as he looked at Amélie, seeing her confident smile, and felt the tight embrace of the triplets, Jean knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. His mother's legacy, the love she had given these children, now lived on through him. "We'll face it together," Amélie said softly, as though reading his thoughts. "One day at a time." Jean nodded, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "One day at a time," he agreed. Exhausted from the tumultuous night, the triplets began to fall asleep, safely nestled between Jean and Amélie. Watching their small faces relax into slumber, Jean made a silent promise to his mother, to Sarah, and to himself. "I will protect them. I will love them. And together we will create a future where they can be who they are, without fear." The rising sun cast its first rays through the window, illuminating the scene in the small bed. A newly formed family, bound not by blood but by choice, love, and a shared destiny. Jean knew the challenges that lay ahead were immense. The mystery of the man of shadows, the girl's powers, the legal fights for custody, all loomed on the horizon. But in that moment, in the quiet morning after the storm, he allowed himself to feel hope. With Amélie by his side and the triplets in his arms, Jean finally understood what his mother had always known, that love, in all its unexpected and extraordinary forms, was the most powerful force of all. And with that love as their compass, they would navigate any storm the future held. François' office was piled high with documents, the air thick with the smell of old paper and unspoken expectations. Jean sat rigidly in the chair opposite the desk, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. Amélie, beside him, held his hand, offering a reassuring smile. François entered, carrying a thick folder. His face was tired, but his eyes gleamed with determination. "Good morning," he said, taking his seat. "We have a lot to discuss." Jean nodded, swallowing hard. "How are our chances?" The attorney sighed, opening the folder. "I won't lie, Jean. The adoption process is complicated under normal circumstances. In the triplets case, we have additional complications." "What sort of complications?" Amélie asked, her voice taut. "Well, first, there's the fact the girls technically ran away from the system. That raises red flags with social services, and there's also no blood relation between you and the children, which usually makes the process harder." Jean felt his heart sink. The thought of losing the girls now after everything was unbearable. "There must be something we can do," he pleaded, his voice trembling. François raised a hand, a faint smile forming on his lips. "There is something," he said, pulling a yellowed envelope from his folder. "Sarah left this, a letter expressing her explicit wish for you, Jean, to care for the girls if anything happened to her." Jean took the envelope with shaking hands. The handwriting was delicate but firm. Carefully, he opened it and began reading aloud. "Dear Jean, although we have never met, I feel I know you through the stories your mother, Marie, told me. She was my guardian angel, my salvation in my darkest moments, and now I must ask you to be the same for my daughters. If you're reading this, it means my fears came true. I know it's a lot to ask, but I beg you, care for Emma, Sophie, and Chloe. Protect them, love them, guide them. They're special in ways you can hardly imagine, and they'll need someone strong and compassionate to help them navigate this world. Marie spoke often of you, of your kindness and integrity. I know that. If you accept this responsibility, my girls will be in good hands. With eternal gratitude and hope, Sarah." Jean lowered the letter, silent tears streaking down his cheeks. Amélie hugged him tightly, her own emotions clear. François cleared his throat, visibly moved. "This letter," he said, "combined with Claire's testimony about Marie's involvement with Sarah and the girls, gives us a strong footing. It won't be easy, but we have a real chance." In the weeks that followed, Jean and Amélie threw themselves into the preparations. Amélie's small house, once solitary, now buzzed with activity. Walls were painted, furniture rearranged, and a special room prepared for the triplets. Meanwhile, the girls remained in Jean and Amélie's temporary care, an exceptional arrangement due to the unique circumstances of the case. adapting was challenging for everyone. One evening, Jean found Emma sitting alone on the porch, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, offering a blanket. "What are you thinking about, little one?" he asked gently. Emma sighed, a sound far too heavy for a 5-year-old. "I miss Mommy," she whispered. "Sometimes guilty when I close my eyes I can feel her, like she's still here watching us." Jean's heart tightened. "Your mom loved you very much," he said, "and wherever she is now, I'm sure she's proud of how strong and brave you three are." Emma turned to him, her eyes bright in the faint light. "Jean," she said hesitantly, "is it okay if we call you Dad someday?" The question caught Jean by surprise, a wave of emotion washing over him. "Oh, Emma," he said, pulling her into a hug, "it would be the greatest honor." Inside the house, Amélie was facing her own challenges. Sophie was having a particularly hard day, her powers manifesting as small objects that floated around her when she became upset. "Breathe, sweetheart," Amélie coached, holding Sophie's hands. "Remember what we practiced. Picture a calm lake." Slowly, the objects settled back down. Sophie looked at Amélie with wide eyes. "What if I never learn to control it?" she asked, voice trembling. Amélie smiled, smoothing Sophie's hair. "You will. We're here to help. And Sophie, your gifts are part of who you are. They're not something to be feared, but embraced and understood." Meanwhile, Chloe, the quietest of the three, spent hours drawing. Her artwork, filled with strange shadows and lights, was a constant reminder of the unique challenges these girls faced. One night, after the girls were asleep, Jean found Amélie in the kitchen, an untouched glass of wine before her. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside her. "Everything okay?" Amélie gave a tired smile. "Just thinking." "Jean, have you considered what we're getting into? These girls, they're not just regular kids who need a home. They have abilities we barely understand, and there are people out there who want them because of it." Jean nodded, taking her hand. "I know. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up panicked, thinking of everything that could go wrong. But then I remember the look in their eyes when we first brought them home. The hope, the relief. Amélie, they need us." "And we need them," Amélie added, giving Jean's hand a gentle squeeze. "It's scary, but it's also wonderful, isn't it? Finding a family like this all of a sudden?" Jean smiled, leaning in to kiss Amélie softly. "It is wonderful. And together, we'll face whatever comes." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Gradually, a routine emerged. Mornings were filled with noisy breakfasts and laughter. Afternoons brought improvised lessons, not just reading and math, but also learning to manage and understand the girls' unique gifts. Jean learned to braid hair and distinguish each triplet's individual likes and dislikes. Amélie became an expert at soothing nightmares and creating safe spaces for the girls to practice their powers. The adoption process moved forward slowly, each hearing and social worker's visit bringing a mixture of hope and anxiety. But with each passing day, the bond between Jean, Amélie, and the triplets grew stronger. One night, as he tucked the girls into bed, Jean reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. From a lonely, directionless man, he was now the pillar of an extraordinary family. "Good night, my little ones," he whispered, kissing each forehead. "Good night, Dad," came the drowsy reply in unison. Jean froze, his heart overflowing with emotion. It was the first time all three had called him that together. Silent tears streamed down his cheeks as he quietly closed their bedroom door. Amélie waited in the hallway, her own face glowing with happiness. "You heard?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jean nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I heard," he whispered, "and I promise I'll spend the rest of my life earning that title." The couple headed to their own room, the house now enveloped in an aura of peace and purpose. Outside, the world remained dangerous and uncertain. The man of shadows was still a distant threat, and raising 3 children with extraordinary powers was daunting. But that night, in that home, There was only love, hope, and the certainty that together they could face whatever fate brought. Morning sunlight filtered through the brightly colored curtains, casting a golden glow across the triplets' bedroom. Jean paused at the door, watching the three girls still asleep, their blonde hair splayed across the pillows. A year had passed since that stormy night in the park, and the transformation was undeniable. Emma, always the most perceptive, slowly opened her eyes. "Good morning, Dad," she murmured sleepily, a smile spreading across her face. "Good morning, my little one," Jean replied gently. "Time to wake up. We have a big day ahead." The other two girls began stirring, and soon the room was filled with cheerful chatter. Jean's heart brimmed with love as he helped the girls get ready for the special day awaiting them. In the kitchen, Amélie was preparing breakfast, the aroma of pancakes filling the air. She smiled as Jean walked in with the triplets. "Are my flower girls ready?" she teased, her eyes shining with happiness. Sophie ran to hug Amélie. "Almost. We just need flowers in our hair." The day flew by in a whirlwind of excitement. The small wedding ceremony took place in the backyard, transformed into a fairy tale scene with twinkling lights and flowers everywhere. The triplets, dressed in matching pastel dresses, walked down the makeshift aisle, scattering rose petals. When Amélie appeared, radiant in her simple yet elegant gown, Jean felt his breath catch, their eyes locked, and in that moment, every hardship of the past year felt worth it. "We are gathered here," the officiant began, "to celebrate not only the union of Jean and Amélie, but the birth of an extraordinary family. Vows were exchanged, tears were shed, and when the couple sealed their union with a kiss, the triplets clapped enthusiastically. The small reception afterward was brimming with joy and love. Claire, François, and other close friends who had supported the family through the tumultuous adoption process joined the celebration. As the afternoon wore on, Jean found himself momentarily alone, watching the scene before him. Amélie was dancing with the girls, their laughter echoing through the garden. Then François approached, a serious expression on his face. "Jean," he said quietly, "there's something I need to give you. We found it among your mother's belongings. She left instructions for it to be handed to you today." Jean took the envelope François offered, his heart pounding at the sight of his mother's handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened the letter and began to read. "My dear Jean, if you are reading this, it means fate has taken the path I hoped for. You have found the triplets and, more importantly, you have found your way back to love and family. I always knew there was greatness in you, my son, a compassion and strength sometimes hidden, but which I knew would bloom when most needed. Forgive me for keeping so many secrets. My work with Sarah and other women like her was dangerous, but necessary. And the triplets, they are special in ways you are only beginning to understand. I am so proud of the man you have become, Jean, of the father you are now. Know that wherever I am, I'm smiling upon you, Amélie, and my beloved granddaughters. Always remember, love is the greatest magic of all. It protects us, guides us, and makes us truly extraordinary. With all my love, always, Mom." Jean folded the letter, silent tears slipping down his face. He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder and turned to see Amélie, her eyes full of understanding. "She would be so proud of you," Amélie whispered, drawing him into a hug. In the following months, a sense of peace settled over Jean that he had never known before. The triplets thrived under the loving care of their new parents. Emma used her empathy to help others, often mediating small disputes at school. Sophie grew confident in her abilities, learning to move objects with grace and intention. And Chloe, though still plagued by occasional visions, found comfort in art, her drawings becoming increasingly vibrant and hopeful. The threat of the Man of Shadows never fully vanished, but with François' help and Jean and Amélie's constant vigilance, the girls were safe and loved. One sunny autumn afternoon, the family decided on a picnic at the park. The same park where, more than a year ago, Jean had first encountered the triplets. Seated on a blanket beneath a large oak tree, Jean and Amélie watched the girls play. Emma chased a butterfly, her laughter echoing in the air. Sophie made leaves dance in small, colorful whirlwinds. Chloe sat a bit apart, drawing the scene with crayons, her expression serene and focused. "Who would have thought," Amélie murmured, resting her head on Jean's shoulder, "that a rainy day encounter would change our lives so completely?" Jean smiled, pulling her closer. "Fate works in mysterious ways," he replied. "But I'm grateful for every moment, every challenge that brought us here." As the sun began to set, painting the sky pink and gold, Jean reflected on the astonishing journey he had taken. From a solitary, drifting man, he had become the bedrock of an extraordinary family. The triplets, with their unique powers and loving hearts, had filled a void in his life he hadn't known existed. And Amélie, she was the partner he never knew he needed, her strength and compassion perfectly complementing his own. The girls ran back to the blanket, their faces flushed with excitement and happiness. "Dad, Mom," Emma called, "can we stay just a little longer?" Jean exchanged a knowing smile with Amélie before replying, "Of course, my darlings, we've got all the time in the world." As the triplets scampered off to play again, Jean pulled Amélie into a gentle kiss. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges they could barely imagine. But in that moment, in that park, with the sound of their daughter's laughter in the background, Jean knew that whatever came, they would face it together. A chance meeting in the rain had changed everything, and Jean could not be more grateful for every drop of that storm that led him to this new dawn, a life brimming with love, purpose, and magic.